Hi guys, welcome to Discover the Duncan Difference podcast. I'm here today with Kristen Hull. She is our expert at financial planning. She's incredible. So this entire podcast episode is going to be about financial planning. So we're really excited to bring this to you. This is going to be lots of really good information. So Kristen, welcome.
Emily, thank you very much.
You're so good at this. So I'm really excited to be able to pick your brain.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about you. First of all, what do you do at Duncan, and who you are a little bit as a person?
Sure thing. So I am the Associate Director of Financial Planning here at Duncan Financial Group. So my job is a little bit different than what most people think of when they think of financial advisor. So unlike a wealth manager, where I focus exclusively on clients' assets and growing their assets, I instead help clients plan for their future goals, whether those goals are retirement planning or education planning or even just estate planning.
Mm-hmm.
I help them understand where they are now, where they ultimately want to be, and how we can get them there.
Mm-hmm. And you take into account all of the things.
Everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what financial planning is. So financial planning is just taking a comprehensive look at one's picture and understanding what does that mean for them. So the best way that I can explain that is think of a junk drawer that you have at home, right?
Mm-hmm.
That junk drawer, you throw everything in there. You have menus, you have batteries, you have your kids'
Pens.
school permission slips, everything, right? A lot of clients' finances are in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, you have a life insurance policy, well, you stick that somewhere. You have your wills, you stick that somewhere. You get your 401k statement, you throw that somewhere in your pay stub. But what a lot of times happens is clients don't understand how it all works together, how their cash flow helps them with saving strategies and how those saving strategies help them understand what insurance they need and how that insurance policy then transfers into their will. So my job is to take that financial junk drawer, organize it for them, and show them what that means relative to their future.
Yes, I can't wait to dig into it. So
yes, ma'am.
First, tell me a little bit about yourself, because you're an interesting person. You're not just a financial planner.
Well, that's a loaded question. So I have been in the industry for 19 years. Next year will be my 20th anniversary, 20th year in the financial services industry.
Mm-hmm.
So I fell into this industry, believe it or not. So initially I went to school for accounting.
Wow.
No offense
Didn't
to any
know that.
CPAs out there, but accounting was not for me.
Yeah.
So I ended up switching my career path and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I ended up going into business administration. I went to St. Hill University for business administration. And after I finished my undergrad, I wanted to go on to graduate school. Wasn't sure what I wanted to do actually. So I went for an HR degree. So I have an HR I have an MBA in human resource management. Yes.
Wow.
So at the same time, a friend of mine, her mom was working in banking.
Mm-hmm.
She said, Kristen, I realized that you kind of work in the business field. Any chance that you would come and work for us? Said, yes, sure, fine. I needed a job at that point. I was young and didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went into banking. And honestly, everything kind of just fell onto my lap. Every time that I thought I realized what I wanted to do, life would take a turn.
It would change.
It would. And I kind of fell into this industry. And about 15 years ago, I was working for a firm where we started to kind of play around with financial planning. And I don't want to say play around, but we really started to dive into it. And I had no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
And then as I started to really understand it and research it and kind of just switch the way that I was communicating with clients, I realized that planning was a better solution for me, not just the wealth management side of things, because again, a lot of advisors, they want to focus on growing your assets and understand how that works with the market and everything. And that's great. We need that. That just wasn't where I fit into things.
Yeah.
So I kind of switched my frame of reference to focus more on planning for clients, and it just became an immediate love for me. So that's really where I focus on how I can help clients, building those relationships, etc. So that's work.
Yeah.
Outside of work, I have two awesome kiddos. I have two daughters, 13 and 8. Actually, she's about to turn 9. Coolest kids ever.
Yeah.
I spend all of my time chauffeuring them to activities, which is a lot of fun, 7 days a week. So they're in soccer and karate and cheer and gymnastics and tumbling. Awesome husband, actually my high school sweetheart. So we have been together for, I can't do the math that quick off the top of my head, a very, very long time, over 60% of our lives together.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's awesome. And then, I I love working outside of work. I do karate as well.
Yes.
I am just about to test for my black belt in Tung Do, which is
I'm
super
scared
duper
of
cool.
you.
So it's fun. It's just kind of my little outlet whenever I'm not here. So that's kind of my story.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Please.
You kind of touched on it in the beginning, but like really, what is financial planning and what do you do for our clients?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I actually get that question a lot whenever I tell people, hey, I'm the Associate Director of Financial Planning. And they say,
yeah, what's that?
What's that? Right. So ultimately, when we do planning for a client, it's really just achieving whatever their specific goals and objectives are. And sometimes that's a singular focus. For many clients that we work with, that's retirement planning. How do we make sure that we get to retirement and don't outlive our assets?
Yep.
But for a number of clients, it's a lot of different goals. I think about myself, for example, right? I want to retire at some point, but I have 2 kiddos that are quickly approaching college years. I need to save for them as well. Because they're young, I want to make sure that they're protected. So I think about how I'm going to transfer my estate, who the appropriate people are. So it's really just finding what's important to a client and helping them plan for those goals. Now, that's easier said than done, because it's one thing to say, hey, I want to retire at age 65. I want to live off of this dollar amount. And we can certainly formulate a saving strategy to make sure we align with it. But part of planning involves understanding the unknown, right? And a lot of times we're then having to make sure that we contend with everything that's kind of prevalent out there right now. If you listen to any financial podcast, inflation and interest rates and longevity and taxes and healthcare. It's making sure that we take all of those unknowns and embed them into our thought process as well. So as we think about financial planning, it's really just helping clients get to their goals while making sure that we think about all of the what ifs that could possibly happen along the way. Now, as we do that, here at Duncan Financial Group, what I love is we look at it kind of under 4 different modules. So one, we look at the best way to grow our clients' wealth for them, whatever that goal is. Again, if it's retirement planning, education planning, maybe they want to buy a vacation home. Yeah. We understand the best way to help them grow their assets to get to the point where they can be financially independent. But then from there, we talk about how we leverage wealth. So just going back to that wealth management role, we need somebody who's going to manage the growth of those assets for them. So looking at the best way that we can allocate their account and be mindful of their risk and their time frame, but also being mindful of just what are the tax buckets of each one of those, kind of IRA versus Roth versus taxable. So we look at how we can leverage those assets. So as we're growing and leveraging those assets, it's really important that we protect them as well. So bringing up discussion of life insurance policies or disability policies or long-term care policies, or even just an umbrella policy where you kind of put a blanket on everything. Yes. You want to make sure that as we're growing your assets, you're not at risk to lose them in the event of an unforeseen circumstance. And then subsequently making sure that we transfer them according to their plans, whether that's a beneficiary designation, a more complicated legal structure, whatever that might be. It's making sure that if something were to happen to them unexpectedly, that they're the folks that they indicate that they want to have benefit from those dollars are intended in that way. Yeah.
And it really is truly so comprehensive. Like you're taking it all into consideration.
That's correct.
And I think that kind of is what sets us apart from other agencies where they're maybe just trying to grow your wealth, or they're just, making sure that you have a life insurance policy and that you're growing your wealth. We're doing literally all of the things.
Everything. That's
from now when you're maybe in your 30s, 40s, 50s, wherever you're at, all the way until you pass away, whether that's suddenly you're protected, or whether you live until you're 90 and you need long-term care. Like we're taking it all into consideration.
That's right. And I mean, I'm glad that you said that, because part of the things I didn't talk about so far is, we look at pay stubs and social security statements because we want to understand cash flow. Yeah. The reason why I bring that up is part of that comes down to how do we make sure that we're setting up an appropriate budget. Now, I don't want to say budget and think of like this negative connotation. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, you're going to
X amount.
Exactly. That's not it, but it's making sure that we're just being smart and diligent about the amount of dollars that we're expending, kind of going back to those needs and those wants. I say that because as we're looking at expenses, we help just making sure that everything makes sense for them. So a lot of times where we find a lot of folks are spending dollars somewhat unnecessarily or not to the extent that they realize is in insurance premiums.
Yes.
So we'll bring in our personal lines team to just review their auto and homeowners insurance. Again, make sure that an umbrella policy is there. Yeah. We have our health team take a look at their health insurance premiums or Medicare. We have our tax team take a look at it to see if there's any ways that we could reduce some of the taxes along the way. So what I love about Duncan Financial Group is it allows us to bring that comprehensive element to it because we have an expert on staff that can help us.
Right.
I'm not going to pretend to know every darn thing about everything, right? But I know the person that I can go to make sure that we're looking at it.
Exactly. And that's what is so awesome about our company is that you're not coming to a financial advisor who's like, oh yeah, I can do all of this for you. You're like, yeah, I have no idea. So I'm going to pass you along to our personal lines team because they'll help you.
Whether that's personal lines, somebody else on our private wealth team,
Yes.
whether that's our tax and accounting team, we have experts here that allow us to bring that comprehensive element to them and with an expert solution in place.
Exactly. My next question for you is financial planning only for people that are wealthy? Because I think about it where I'm like, I don't have a ton of money, you know, sometimes it's paycheck to paycheck.
Sure.
And I think about people with that mindset, maybe especially with the economy, the way that it is, you know, people are like, well, I'm just trying to make ends meet. I can't even consider anything else. So are we there to help people like that?
Oh my gosh, yes. In fact, I find that planning is often for folks who don't have a lot of net worth accumulated yet. Now, let me be very clear. We help clients across any walk of life. It doesn't matter what age you are. It doesn't matter your timeline. It doesn't matter your net worth. In fact, those with a lower net worth are the ones who can benefit from planning conversations a little bit more. And what I appreciate here at Duncan Financial Group is we work with everybody. We don't have account minimums. There's not a threshold that you need in order to work with us. And in fact, you know, if I were to tell anybody anything or anybody who's looking to get started, it's talk to a planner, have that conversation with them because as you indicated, even if you are living paycheck to paycheck right now, that's likely not going to be over the duration of your lifetime, right? So if you are in a little bit of a cash flow crunch right now, awesome. Let's sit down and review everything. Maybe you're missing something. Maybe those expenses don't necessarily line up, but having somebody else take a look at them is very beneficial because looking at your expenses, really helping to identify the needs versus the wants helps us find pockets of dollars that might otherwise be available. Well, great. Well, now when you have those pockets of dollars available, that's money that we could deploy to debt payment or that's money that we could deploy to savings. And then from there, it's also understanding what does that timeline look like? You know, maybe you're a little bit of in a cash flow crunch because of a loan that'll be paid off 2 years from now. Awesome. Well, let's understand what happens on the other side of that. So getting back to your question, is it for anyone with a specific net worth or do you have to have a large net worth? No, absolutely not. Literally anybody from any walk of life would benefit from a planning conversation regardless of where you are. It really just then comes down to what's the complexity of the need of the planning that we would do for you.
Right. And I think it's also so important too. You think about like something like life insurance where people think it's going to be this huge expense and they think they don't have the money for it. And it's really like, if you're young and you're healthy, like you can get a good, you don't have to be paying an arm and a leg for your insurance monthly. And you're really protecting yourself, like your family, your kids, you know. If you are living paycheck to paycheck and you pass away, your spouse is then left to, you know, scramble. And if you don't have a life insurance policy in place, my God, you can, you know, that really not only are they suffering from the loss of you, but then they're, you know, trying to figure out life without you can be, you know.
You bring up so many really good points. So again, if you're in a little bit of a cash flow crunch, sure, maybe it seems like another expense is the last thing that you want to take on. But to your point, you have to think about what happens afterwards. Gosh, there's been too many times with too many clients that we've seen so many scenarios happen that they didn't take a life insurance policy or some other protection solution in place. And a travesty occurred. And you're right. Oftentimes with a life insurance policy, folks think that it's going to be a couple $1,000s a year. And that's not necessarily the case. You can protect your loved ones literally. And I know that we've talked about this internally a few times. You can do it like for the cost of a couple cups of coffee a month. Right?
Absolutely.
So depending on what your need is there, the cost isn't really as extravagant. And the level of protection that you provide to your client, you absolutely cannot put a price tag on that.
Agreed.
So you're right. Sometimes those cash flow crunches do make you think about, I don't want to do anything else.
I don't have another dollar to spend.
However, sometimes we could just take from one bucket to put to another. Again, sometimes when we look at the expenses, I might say, hey, Emily, maybe stopping
the Starbucks has got to stop
twice a week.
Because we could actually put this too.
And we find that many times we're able to help clients just be very mindful of it. And what that translates to is making smart decisions on your money now just gives better financial habits for you moving forward so that whenever it comes time to that goal, you're in such a better place.
So why is financial planning important?
So again, because a lot of folks typically isolate one part of their financial scenario to another, they don't see how it all works together. And again, I know I talked about the junk drawer, but that's really it. When you look at your paycheck, you don't think about how that works for everything else. You're just looking at savings, right?
Yeah.
Throwing money into your 401k plan, your IRA, whatever that might be. And the same thing, your retirement plan. You're really most of the time just looking at that to say, hey, is this making money for me? Right. And insurance and et cetera. So planning is very helpful to bring it all together. And I can't stress that enough, because what I find when I have client conversations after we go through their plan, I say to them, what did you get out of this? What stood out to you? And a lot of it is just the organization of everything and showing how that all works together. And along the way, by us doing that, then we identify any gaps that we might see. A lot of times clients don't know what they don't know. I mean, anybody, you don't know what it is that you're not aware of, right? So it helps us just to identify any of those red flags that might have otherwise been overlooked, whether that's just not saving enough, maybe not saving enough to get a full employer match, maybe tax inefficient strategies, not having something buttoned up in your legal document. By us looking at everything across the board, it really just helps put together better solutions for you in the long run, or for our clients in the long run.
So I think that some people probably think like, oh, I can just do this myself. It's just like a simple like budgeting and stuff, but it really isn't, because first of all, you guys have tools that, are incredible at putting all this information together and doing those projections and figuring that all out. And I think it's really hard for somebody to know, like you guys have like a list of like, this is what we need, And I think it's hard for a person who that's not their specialty to know to do all of that together.
Yeah. And you know what, that's a really good point. So we work with a lot of do-it-yourselfers, and that's fine. There's no problem with do-it-yourself.
Yeah,
to some
I'm a big
extent.
DIY. Yeah,
right. And you're right. There's so many great resources out there anymore. I mean, you can go to Barnes & Noble, pick up a book on how to do financial planning, find a financial planning calculator, and you can see ultimately what it is that you need for purposes of your goal and back into it.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest, almost anybody could do that, right?
Right.
If you're somewhat savvy with numbers and just, thoughts there. But what we bring to it is not only that comprehensive approach, however, it's making sure that we kind of take into consideration all of those things that you're not thinking about.
Yes.
A retirement calculator isn't going to tell you what happens if inflation goes greater than what we're experiencing right now and stays that way for a period of time. The retirement calculator isn't going to help you solve for if you live 10 years longer than you anticipated. It's not going to solve for whenever the market takes a downturn in the year that you're retiring, and now we need to make up that income gap. So I say that because there's a lot of flaws with retirement calculators out there. Again, I don't want to be negative towards any one of them, because I think that they're a great starting point. It's just oftentimes we're able to help understand what is missing from those and how that relates to everything across the board, not just that particular scenario that somebody's otherwise looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about why it's important if you are living paycheck to paycheck, if you, have a cash flow problem. Why is it important to be doing financial planning if you have high net worth?
Yeah. So as I
feel like if somebody who has high net worth, I've got plenty of money, I don't need to worry about any of that,
Which is fair to think that way. But just because a client has a high net worth doesn't mean that they're in a better position than somebody who maybe lives paycheck to paycheck. And let me clarify that. High net worth is just because your total asset size is a certain dollar amount.
Yeah.
That net worth can be comprised of real estate assets, business assets, not necessarily cash or investable assets.
Right.
So you could have a high net worth, but not be cash heavy, not cash dependent. And that's fine and dandy, because at some point you're likely going to be able to sell those assets for a dollar amount in the future. What happens if you don't? What happens if something happens to your business? So that's just kind of one example. And another one is, even though you have a high net worth, that doesn't mean that your cash flow situation is any better. You might, high net worth usually means to higher level of expenses. I mean, it's a very similar story. Now, really the difference though is, again, we look at everything. We still look at cash flow. We still look at the best way to continue to grow those assets, leverage those assets, protect them. But what we find oftentimes is whenever clients do have higher net worth, they do have more complex scenarios that we need to think about. A lot of that does then translate to how do we make sure that we're being mindful of their taxes, and how do we look for tax reduction strategies. Just because you have a higher net worth doesn't mean that you made some better choices along the way. There's still a lot of opportunity for us to identify some of those gaps there, right?
Yes.
Or I should say, it doesn't mean that you made the best solutions along the way, right? But what we find the most time is it then comes down to estate planning scenarios, right? And just making sure that documents are buttoned up the way that they want to make sure that we're being mindful of the estate tax exclusion. We're at a point here that in the next couple of years, we might very well see a notable shift to the exclusion amount. What we find a lot of times is higher net worth clients have more complexities. But it's really no different than any other client that we talk to.
And I think too, it's so important if you're a business owner to make sure you have something in place, you know, all of those things. And I don't think that that's something that a business owner is thinking about every day. You know, they've got a lot on their minds when you're running a business.
They're thinking about the business. You're thinking about the day-to-day operations, how you're going to continue to have revenues coming in, how you're going to make sure that you have enough work staff. You're right. Business owners then come with their own level of complexities, right? And they have their own unique set of challenges. All of those things that I mentioned, they're in the day-to-day operations. But what happens, you know, based off the business, if the business does well, great. Maybe you're going to have the buyer want to come in and you're not at a point that you want to retire. How do we plan for that? Or maybe you have a couple years that now your business didn't do as well and you want to shut operations. Well, maybe you're getting a lower value than you anticipated, or maybe your business does exactly the way that you want to, but you don't have a business succession plan put in place. So they have their own, you know, uniqueness to it. Whenever you have partners that you're dealing with, whenever you have children in the business or children not in the business, there's so many ways that we like to have those conversations with business owners. And that's just another layer of how we can help clients plan for their future.
And I think that's something that we do really, really well here. I think that we have kind of that sweet spot for business owners where we are like, we can do it all. It can be all under one roof. You can call us and we can solve, you know, all of those issues for you. We can make sure that you're covered, that you're protected, that we're helping you to grow. Like it really is incredible. I think obviously we help everybody, but I think for business owners, it's definitely like that sweet spot of like, we can solve a lot of your stress. You know?
I would agree with that. And what, again, just going back to the uniqueness of our firm, you know, we have a private wealth team and we have a number of advisors on it. Well, some of those advisors, they focus primarily in the business owner space. And because we have seen so many scenarios and we've seen so many client interactions over the 40 years that we've been in business, we know a thing or two, right? I don't want to steal anybody else's motto here, but what I love about that is not only do we have the departments to help with each one of the things, personal lines, commercial lines, personal wealth, but then we have advisors who they focus primarily in that space. And there's a number of advisors on our team. They've worked with so many business owners that we're able to help anticipate so many different scenarios that again,
the business owner may not think
focused on exactly.
They may not even see something like that coming.
Correct.
Absolutely.
That's right.
What are the consequences of not having a financial plan, of not kind of looking into that and creating something with a financial advisor? What are the cons of not having that in place?
That's a good question. So I would say not necessarily a con, but the biggest difference between somebody who has planned for their goals and somebody who hasn't is really the confidence that comes with those goals, right? So let's just assume that it's retirement planning, for example. So somebody who had never talked to an advisor along the way compared to somebody who has talked to an advisor to get them ready for retirement tends to have better outcomes relative to the amount of income that they'll have in retirement, the amount of net income, because we're smart about the tax buckets that are available to them, making sure that everything has been prioritized and protected as needed, and really just making sure that they have better overall outcomes. So really, I would say that clients that have plans along the way, and especially those that started early, compared to clients who have not done any level of planning, really comes down to their confidence rate.
And I think that's so important because life happens. And if you're not planning for that, if you're not thinking, oh my gosh, you know, I'm going to live till I'm 90 and I'm going to need long-term care a lot longer, or, you know, somebody suddenly passes away. If you're not planning for that and you don't have those built in, you know, then you're kind of left scrambling sometimes, whereas you thought you had enough and you really don't.
I'm glad that you brought that up because planning is important. You know, what I find a lot of times is clients think that we're going to put together a financial plan, we're going to have those discussions and that's it. And that could not be further from the case, right? Planning is an ongoing conversation that you need to have because, as you indicated, life happens. You experience change from one year to the next. My gosh, I think about my own personal scenario and where I am right now. Drastically different from where I was last year, let alone 5 years ago.
Absolutely.
And so planning allows us to keep up with that. every year you're going to experience changes. Now, whether those are some changes that you wish didn't happen, such as maybe you lost your job or you lost somebody very important to you in your family, or whatever that consequence might be, compared to maybe some of the more positive ones, maybe you had a new child or a grandchild and you want to make sure that you plan appropriately for them. Or we know that you're in such a great place heading into retirement or whatever your goal might be, that maybe we can find ways to make life a little bit more exciting for you. Planning involves those routine conversations. My favorite scenarios are whenever we do planning conversations for clients, we help them map out to where they want to be. And then all of a sudden, a year from now, they say, hey, Kristen, we realize how much family time is important to us, and we want to make sure that we build in an additional travel buffer, or we want to buy that lake home or build that vacation, that beach home that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
That is my absolute favorite thing. So now it just comes down to me finding ways to make that happen for them. So I'm glad that you said that about life happens, because that's the exact reason that those planning conversations need to continue.
Yeah.
I know for our clients, whenever we meet with them every year, we're just talking about what has changed, what's new in your life.
Right.
Let's make sure that we're planning the right way.
Yeah.
And the best way that I could explain that is, think about when you go on a road trip with your kids, right? Let's say one of my kids' favorite place to go to is Lake Erie. We love going to Lake Erie. Yeah. You love going to Erie as well. You have family there. So Lake Erie, on average, is about 3 to 3.5 hour drive, right? Yeah. Let's just use this as an example. So you map out your GPS for a 3 to 3.5 hour drive. Let's just say 3.5 for purposes of conversation. And you know what time that you're going to get there. Okay, great. When we get there, we're going to have lunch. This is going to be our game plan. Yep. But what happens an hour into that drive?
I have to pee.
What happens 15 minutes after you just left that rest stop?
A big traffic jam.
That's right. And then your kids decide they need a snack. All of a sudden, they haven't eaten since 2 days ago. And now they need to have this big, right? Yep. And then you get back on the road, and now there was an accident. And then there's construction. So along the way, you have to detour. You have to get off of the highway and get onto a side road. And now that 3.5 hour drive just took you 5 hours to get there. So those lunch plans that you had, unfortunately, are completely, they're gone, because now your kids just want to get down to the beach, or my kids love going to Splash Lagoon. Yeah. So my point to that is, we have an end goal in mind. We have a plan to get there, but all of these what ifs come up that we weren't otherwise anticipating. Now, you knew that that's a possibility. Yeah. But now we ran into it. Yeah. Retirement's no different. You have your end goal in mind. You know, you want to retire. Let's just say you want to retire early at 60 and you want to spend $100,000 a year. Great. We have that mapped out. But now all of those roadblocks, inflation, interest rates, market volatility, healthcare expenses, taxes, kind of created all those detours for you. Again, we had a feeling that those were going to happen, but now when they do happen, we're able to switch gears very easy for clients. Planning is the exact same way. Yeah, they're built in. Those detours and the what ifs of life are built into your plan. It's never going to be a straight path. Yeah, we factor in everything else. Yeah, that's right.
My last question for you, Kristen, is what is one piece of advice that you give your 20-year-old self?
Oh, that's a good question. So, as it relates to the financial world, I'd say that the most common advice that's out there is to start saving as early as possible. Absolutely. And I don't disagree with that. But and that's what, you Google it and that's going to be your top answer. And that's important, because the earlier that you start saving, the more that you have available for you, the more that you can use along the way. Yeah. But that's not it. That's really not the only thing that should be taught to younger individuals. Yeah. Really, the part of it is just having discipline and good financial habits. But how do you tell somebody to have a good financial habit, right? Like what? If I told my 20-year-old self, Kristen, you should have good financial habits. Yeah. Now I might be the exception that I did, but how do you define that, right? Right. So there's, in addition to saving strategies, there's just some important takeaways that I wish that we would teach younger generations a little bit more. In that, yes, start saving as early as you possibly can, but that doesn't necessarily mean investing right away. Yeah. Build your emergency reserve. Make sure you have adequate liquidity in a checking or savings account to cover your expenses, right? Yeah. That's so important, and it's so missed very often. A lot of folks think when they save, they need to deposit it right into their 401k or into an investment account. And sure, that's a great goal to have, but it's really important to make sure that fundamentally you have the foundations established.
Yes.
So saving early, yes, very important. But another important takeaway is just make sure they're being smart with debt.
Mm-hmm.
You know, avoiding credit card balances. Now, I don't want to say don't use a credit card, because I think credit cards are great. They help you build out credit for the day that you otherwise need it. But it's making sure that you have adequate liquidity to pay off that credit card statement every single month and not accrue a balance.
Yes. And that interest,
Exactly. And then not only that, it's just making sure that whatever debt you might otherwise have, whether that's student loan debt, whether that's a mortgage that you acquire in your 20s, a car loan, that you pay it off as quick as possible. Again, just trying to reduce that interest that you pay to somebody else, just being smart with your debt management overall.
Yeah.
But really that comes down to, as we were talking about earlier, talk to an advisor as quick as possible. Just because you're in your 20s and just starting out doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a conversation with an advisor. I can't tell you how many clients that I talk to that are younger that I love having those conversations. In fact, just yesterday, maybe it was Wednesday, but it was one day this week. I was talking to a young man. He was 17 years old.
Wow.
And I love it. His parents had asked me to have a conversation with him because he was taking a financial literacy course in his high school, which is just so cool. Let me just say
I love that, because we were not taught that at all.
Correct. And just the things that are being taught in the high school level now is amazing. But he really took a lot from that and realized he could be very smart and set himself up for a very good future if he makes good decisions right now. And I loved that so much. And the mom kept telling me, Kristen, I'm so sorry that you're taking the time to do this. And I said, are you kidding me?
I love it.
I'm so excited to do this. So just
to have someone so young, like to be that excited about it, and that
exactly,
and it's just he's just setting himself up. Oh my gosh,
just making those good financial habits now. So again, if I could just summarize what I would tell my 20-year-old self or any younger student or younger individual right now, save early. But again, part of that's just going back to making sure you have enough in your checking or savings, be smart about your debt, and talk to an advisor as quick as possible.
Yeah, I love that.
Yes, ma'am.
That's so great. Thank you so much
for being here. Thank you for having me. I loved it.
Yes, it was wonderful. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to Discover the Duncan Difference podcast. We drop 8 a.m. every Monday and wherever you find your podcast. And we're just super thankful that you guys were here, and we hope that you took a lot away from this. So thank you.
Bye.